Hello everyone. Before I start, is everyone comfortable in the room? Temperature, seats, all of that kind of malarkey. If red wine would help, gin. Failing that, if there are any issues, just let me know. So my name's John Herring. My main role is I work for the Strategic Clinical Network in Greater Manchester. And cancer's one of the networks that I manage, along with maternity and children's and a few others. And I have a smaller role with the National Cancer Team, which is due to start next month, which is around patient involvement and engagement and getting patients involved in the national programme of work and in the cancer alliances. So I'm going to start with a little story because that's what I like to do, and I'm not going to talk about cancer, so I'm going to talk about mental health instead. So my background as a professional is I was a mental health professional from the mid-90s, and you'll recognise this story if you guys have been around cancer, but we would come in. Can't hear. There we go. Come in, no worries. But I was a psychological therapist, and we had our own little service where we would deliver therapies for people, and then you would have a nursing team who would work with people with severe mental health problems, and you might have a social work team in the local authority who would do the same. You might have some nurses in a GP practice. And we would speak to one another, but we generally speak to one another in order to play tennis. So with patients. So to say, well, actually what I need to do is move that person onto your service, and then they might say, well, I don't think they're for our service, and there'd be this batting backwards and forwards and this kind of conversation about whose patient it was and who was appropriate. And in mental health, the change came in the early 2000s with what was called National Service Framework. And the change came when people began to think about the fact that maybe a network of different professionals might bring something different to the table. So this idea that if they were talking about somebody's care, that it might be good to have a psychologist, a nurse, a social worker, an occupational therapist, a support worker in the room to have that conversation. And you'll recognise that in cancer. Those are the multidisciplinary teams. So the recognition of that kind of work and the idea that different ideas might actually benefit people is the idea of networks, isn't it? That's the idea of creating a network of people who might just, because of their different interests, ideas, backgrounds, be able to do something bigger and better than what an individual or one person might be able to do on their own. And of course, strategic clinical networks, have people heard? Some of you will be working in them, but yeah. Some of you will be unpaid working in this room. And of course, strategic clinical networks came around in the early 2000s, and that was, again, that sense of bringing people together. I guess the alliances, we've seen lots of changes, haven't we, in the NHS, where networks were strong probably in the past for those of you who were around, and then probably felt a lot weaker when the changes that came through the Health and Social Care Act happened. The Cancer Alliance principle, the idea is around that same idea of bringing people together, rather than maybe just different professionals, different organisations. And I suppose the big shift is from just looking at acute care to looking at the whole pathway. And you've heard a lot about that this morning. So from prevention of cancer, early diagnosis of cancer, all the way through to living with the condition and dying with the condition. So the whole pathway. What I plan to do is just go through the alliances. For those, some of you will know a lot about them. You might know more than me than what I'm able to say. Some of you will know less, and hopefully this is useful. And the big plan really is to get your thoughts and ideas. We've got 4 questions at the end. We'll get people on the tables, somebody to facilitate and write on the flip charts. And we want people's thoughts and ideas around 4 areas. What we're trying to do is get lots of information from lots of different people, and patients are clearly, and carers are really important. So are there any questions before I start? No? Okay. So, alliances. So you've got these cards on the table. You're free to use them or not. We've put these on as jargon cards. If I'm talking nonsense, if you don't understand something, the idea is raise a red card if I'm using jargon, if I'm using, acronyms and stuff. And if you're not following what I'm saying, raise a blue card. So it's up to you. You don't have to use them, but if you want to, please feel free to do so. It won't be the first time I've received a red card, Ray. I played a bit of football in my time. So, cancer services. I've just said this is across all the services that we deliver. So this can be from, keep healthy or losing weight club, all the way through to, radiotherapy, specialist support that happens within a hospital and out into supporting people in their own homes, supporting people with, the after effects of the treatment that they've had for cancer. So it's that whole pathway. So obviously Callie spoke this morning, and, Callie is the leader of that big task force document that came out, when was it, July 2 years ago, 2015, which basically gave us 96 recommendations and was led on by CRUK, but with a lot of, Macmillan were involved, lots of other bodies, so Cancer Research UK with a lead organisation. So there was a recommendation that said we should set up cancer alliances. And these should be the things that enable us to improve services, manage them, performance manage them, oversee them. There are 16 alliances across England. Just out of interest, there are professionals in the room. Do you want to put your hands up if you're a part of a cancer alliance as a professional? Oof. And I'll ask patients in a minute. How many? Just keep your hands up. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've got 9. And as a patient involved in a cancer alliance? 2. So let me do my maths. So there's got to be half of you here who aren't involved or are curious or interested. So there are 16 and we've got 9, which is pretty good unless you're from the same area, in which case there might not be 9 geographies. And there's a name lead for each alliance. And often have people heard of sustainability and transformation plans? Some have, some haven't. They've been in the news. These are the plans for regions about how health and care is going to be delivered in particular regions. I won't get into they're quite controversial. They've caused a lot of debate in the press. But often the leads of those sustainability and transformation plans, the lead people or people very closely associated, are often the leads for the Cancer Alliance. Not always, but there's a close association between the two. So, the whole idea is about partnership. It's about leadership from clinicians. So the idea that clinicians guide us, but that all these partners from agencies such as the voluntary sector, hospitals, patients across the sector come together to make decisions and to look at the national objectives that we've got and what makes sense locally. And I've said it's across the pathway, so I won't repeat myself. One of the big things, and I will be asking about this at the end, is about reducing variation. So I'll just leave you with this little thought. This is my personal thought. This is not on my script. If we will be able to take people across the country, those people who are in the top 20%, the top fifth of being well and getting really good outcomes from the treatments they receive, if we could take everybody else up to that, we wouldn't need to invent new cancer drugs or new treatments or new screening and diagnosis. We'd get very close to Sweden's performance. Probably not quite up to that. They've got an 82% of people live 1 year. Ours is what, 70, 71? I can't remember now. It's 70, I think it is, isn't it? But it would take us I know in Greater Manchester, where I work, it would take us probably up around 76, 77%. So That's without spending money on a new drug or having a new proton beam therapy or anything like that. Just hold that in your mind. Because I think as patients, you've got a lot of power around that to challenge the system. So we want people to experience a consistent level of service, and we want those alliances to take local control of the budgets, of how it's delivered. That's the idea. How that might feel on the ground, I'm not so sure. but that's the intention. And again, high quality services for the local population. And this idea of devolution, which is spreading, obviously in Greater Manchester, there's a big push on devolution, but this idea that local people can decide what might be best for them in their area. So, their purpose. I think I've said a lot of this, but their purpose is to improve things like staying healthy, preventing cancer, better screening, better treatment in hospital, obviously, and then helping people on the pathway around living with the condition. So there already has been alliances established. There already are named leads. I'm looking at my colleagues and they're going to nod and say, yeah, there are. And there probably is some agreement of the membership of the board, and that might be different. So there is a board overseeing this. These are people at a senior level, probably chief executives of trusts, chief operating officers of commissioners who commission new services. And they should have an agreement about how governance works. How do they oversee what happens? And how does that work? How do they engage with you as patients? And what is their delivery plan? Now, they have been working on that. They've gone through quite a torturous process, the alliances, it's fair to say. There's been a lot of paperwork involved in trying to describe to the national team what they're going to deliver and how they're going to deliver it. So I've mentioned these sustainability and transformation plans. So there has to be a relationship between the alliance, what the alliance does, and what your health and care system in Cheshire and Mercia, as an example, has said it's going to do. Or in the South East, I know there's 2 alliances there, so that because there are 2 sustainability and transformation plans. So what the alliance says has to match what that plan says. Right, I'll skip that. That is a really nice governance structure, which, you know, people may or may not be a fan of it. The idea is that the alliances are responsible to regions. So if you're in the north of the country, if you're in Cheshire and Mersey, Newcastle, Yorkshire and Humber, you're responsible to your regional board in the north of England. And they in turn are responsible to the National Cancer Board, who oversee all of this. The only area that isn't under this, possibly 2 areas actually, is the vanguard areas. So Greater Manchester isn't under this because it's devolved. And London, the 2 areas of London where the vanguard is, it's a vanguard piece of work, and it reports into the New Care Models team, which is a team within NHS England. But the alliances, that's their route. So, timescale. So, I've said each alliance should have developed all of those things before the end of this financial year, which is in 7 days, which they generally have, to be fair. So, plans to agree by March. I've said about alignment. And then there's a development around data. Data has been something we've really struggled with in the NHS since Andrew Lansley changed things in 2013. It's made things tough for us. And that's still a challenge. So, I said about my 1 day a week role. I'm not going to turn the world around in 1 day a week. We are going to look at recruiting a team around patient involvement and engagement nationally. And the idea of that team, in my mind, is to hold the national team to account for how it engages with patients and how it implements the strategy. So is the national team implementing that strategy and involving patients. Our role as a patient engagement team is to make sure that that's happening. And the second role is to support the cancer alliances, and they're all at different stages about how they might engage with their patients, but to support them in engaging with patients, and I would say to provide patients with some support around tools, around maybe, and I'm sure some of you have got very good links nationally, but how do we support that so that you've got ability to connect with people from different areas of the country and find out, well, what's going on in Newcastle, and are they doing really good stuff, and could we learn from that in Basingstoke, for example? You know, that would be what we'd like to create, really, a place where we can learn together and get the best of what's best. That team's being recruited too soon. So what I want you to do on your tables, so we've got quite a bit of time, there's 4 questions. 3 of them are what we suggested we would be challenging the national team on. Yes?
Yeah.
Go on.
You used 1,000 times the word patients.
Yeah.
But what's equally important, I think, is also carers.
I entirely agree with you.
Cancer can have unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an issue for a family.
Yeah.
And that can spread way beyond the person who's got it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to be able to have mechanisms by which carers can input information.
Entirely agree.
Because I was a carer, and you do your best as a carer to
Mm-hmm.
keep stress away from your loved one who's got cancer. And the other group of people for whom it's got very adverse consequences is young carers, which is defined as people who are under 18
Mm-hmm.
and who have significant caring responsibilities in a family with somebody who's got cancer.
Yeah.
And research shows that young carers underperform at school, are likely to be truants,
Yeah.
and have a much higher risk of getting involved in criminal activity. And one thing I think that's certainly sad in the area where we are, that there is money and a support network for young carers, even though people with families with cancer is the biggest cause of creating young carers, so there are other long-term illnesses involved as well. And it's not joined up with the NHS.
Mm.
And one would hope that young carers and the systems and mechanisms in place for them would be linked in with the NHS to make families, other carers and patients available information, and so for families to recognise that they've got young carers.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all.
I 100% agree with you. Apologies for probably not mentioning carers as much and using short language really quickly to get through the talk, but it's a very well-made point. Yeah, sorry.
Is it just possible to maybe turn the light off directly
Yeah.
on the screen? It's
Sorry. You know what's going to happen, don't you? I'm going to press something and... Oh, no.
that's much better.
Is that better? And you can all still see. I think it's I think the carers point's a really important point, and I think the other thing about the alliances, because you mentioned about the NHS supporting carers, is about bringing that broader system in. That's what the alliance should be doing, because the NHS in supporting carers, I'm sure it can do lots of good stuff, but we have a whole load of other organisations who probably feel a bit of a distance to some of this work, who could really help and actually enable some thought in the whole system about how do you support carers within what is a really difficult journey. So I think it's a really good point. So I have 4 questions. 3 of them, if you ever come to anything I talk about around patient involvement, you'll get bored of me saying them, but I think they're really important. So what does meaningful involvement look like? We know we've seen patient involvement in the past where patients sit on groups, and how is their voice genuinely heard, and how do patients and carers have an impact on the care that's delivered, so that they see a difference when they say, actually, you know, ourselves. We see something different. We'd like to see something different. How can you, as a community, ensure the involvement that you have is representative, so that when patients and carers come to groups, they're not just representing their own experience. Their own experience is important, but if they're representing a broader voice, how do we support people to do that, and how do we get the broader voice in the room? So it was really good this morning to hear from people from the deaf community. That's a group who we just don't hear a lot from generally, and so to have them in the room was really positive. And obviously there are lots of other groups that we need to consider. And that takes me into how, as a patient community, I've put what patient and carer community, do we look at health inequalities? So as I mentioned before, if we actually raise the standards for everyone, then we'd have great outcomes in this country. And my last point is about holding the system to account. So where you see organisational self-interest, bumps in the road created by organisations butting together but not making it smooth, how can patients really help us in the system to say, I thought you said this was patient-centred care. I thought you said this was going to support, awareness amongst young people, or, support for carers. I thought that's what you said you were going to do, because that's what you say all the time. We use that language all of the time. But everybody in this room will have seen an example where organisational interest took precedence over what was patient-centred care. So how do we enable that kind of support for you to be able to hold the system to account and say, where's the collaborative working? Where's the smoothness in the system?